Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Lots to talk about on the show tonight. We have a leaked memo from China. It doesn't happen very often that something leaks out of the Chinese firewall, but this one has, and it lays bare the state of the Chinese economy. For weeks we've been talking about how much pressure the Chinese economy is under. Now this memo gives a realistic picture where China stands at the moment and what kind of impact it could have on Chinese businesses and indeed people across the world. So we'll bring you details of that. We've also been tracking China's latest escalation, the tension in the Taiwan Straits. And tonight we bring you an analysis on where things are going on that front. What is in Xi Jinping's mind? What shapes his policy and actions? How is his relationship with Vladimir Putin? What will be the impact of the Taiwan tensions on India? Tonight we bring you an exclusive interview with Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia and the sharpest and best informed voice on China. He's lived in China for years. He's interacted closely with Xi Jinping, and now he's seen as one of the top commentators in the world on all affairs related to China. We'll bring you an excerpt from that conversation. Is China in recession? Million-dollar question. We've pondered over this question for weeks now. It's hard to say for sure because Chinese economic data is unreliable. So the world relies on signals to assess what is happening in China. And tonight we have the clearest signal yet. A leaked document on the Chinese economy, a memo written by one of China's most prominent businessmen. This memo comes from Huawei, China's biggest technology company. Its founder, Ren Zhengfei, is a worried man today. He wrote a memo to his employees, and this is being called the most frank assessment of the Chinese economy from an insider. Now, the memo has leaked, and we have a copy of it. It's rare for something like this to come out of China. Tell all on the business environment in communist China. Ren Zhengfei is making sweeping changes at Huawei, his company. The focus, he says, is purely on survival, which means losses will not be tolerated. The days of scaling up are over. Huawei will not pursue rapid expansion. Instead, it will chase cash flow. What explains this hard shift? The answer is in the leaked memo. This is what it says, and I'm quoting. Huawei must reduce any overly optimistic expectations for the future, and until 2023 or even 2025, we must make survival the most important guideline, and not only survive, but survive with quality. Survive and earn a little money where we can. From this point of view, we need to adjust the market structure and study what can be done and what should be abandoned. Let me remind you, this is the founder of China's biggest company, one of the biggest. A man strongly backed by the Communist Party, a man Xi Jinping bet on to turn China into a tech superpower. Why is he in survival mode today? Yes, his company Huawei faced some hurdles. Several countries banned it because of its links with the Communist Party, but that's old news. And Huawei's bottom line still looks good. This year, the company earned a revenue of over $25 billion. And we're not done with the year yet. So $25 billion so far. Last year, the company announced a profit of around $10 billion. So money is clearly not a problem. Then why is Ren worried about his company's survival? Again, the leaked memo has the answers. Let me quote again. The next decade will be a very painful historical period as the global economy continues to decline. With survival the main principle, Marginal businesses will be shrunken and closed, and the chill will be felt by everyone. Sound like prophetic words. Let me repeat that. The chill will be felt by everyone, and it is being felt across China already. Ren's memo went viral on Chinese social media. Reports say more than 100 million users have discussed it. The comments are revealing. Here's one from Weibo. Weibo is the Chinese version of Twitter. This is what one user says. The economic downturn has imposed an unprecedented challenge on most ordinary people and private companies in China. When a giant like Huawei is raising this issue, it speaks volumes about the severity of the problem. Now, reports say Huawei has already announced budget cuts. Teams which don't turn in a profit will not get their bonuses. And this too is being discussed on the Chinese internet. Let me show you another comment. This is what it says. Most workers did not get matching rewards when the company was doing well, so please don't send a chill to us. Sounds like a disgruntled employee. But look at the bigger picture. China's biggest company is making budget cuts. It is tightening its belt, talking about survival. Huawei should be able to weather this storm. After all, it still has the backing of the Chinese state. But what about other players? What about foreign players and foreign companies in China? Well, they're not waiting to find out. They're leaving. 3 major companies top this list. Tech giant Apple, car makers Honda and Mazda. Reports say they're considering building alternative supply chains. About time, we say. And they're doing it now because they're losing money. Let's take the case of Mazda. Earlier this month, the company reported an operating loss of $115 million. Why did Mazda suffer these losses? Because of China's Wuhan virus lockdowns, Mazda faced production snags thanks to Xi Jinping's zero-COVID policy. And now there's a new wave of shutdowns in China. This is because of the electricity shortage. It was triggered by an unprecedented drought. The province of Sichuan is the worst hit. Factories in 19 out of 21 cities there were closed last week. First, it was the pandemic and zero COVID. Then came the crisis in the property sector. And now we have electricity shortages and the drought. No economy can survive so many disruptions, not even China. Last month, they released their quarterly economic data. From retail sales to manufacturing to even investments, China missed every growth target. Unemployment is at a record high. 20% of the youth in Chinese cities are without a job. And businesses like Huawei are scaling back. So quick recovery is out of the question. The Chinese economy is falling into recession. And like Ren Zhengfei said, everyone will feel the chill.
Xi Jinping, I believe, certainly sees China as now the superior partner.
And now it's time for a Gravitas exclusive. Will China invade Taiwan? Events of this past month have given us an answer to that question. China will not shy away from launching an invasion. It's a question of when, not if. What does that tell you about Xi Jinping? Well, here at WION, we've always maintained that India must take lessons from the situation around Taiwan because Xi Jinping's campaign of expansionism will not end with Taiwan. A successful invasion will only embolden him further. That's also the assessment of our guest today, former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. He's among the few world leaders who have looked at Xi Jinping in the eye and dealt with him very closely. Kevin Rudd says once Xi Jinping gets Taiwan, he will double down. The Chinese president could well turn his attention towards smaller disputes, other disputes. And this includes the Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh. What would that mean for India? How do the Chinese assess India after what happened in Galwan? The answers might surprise you. Here's an excerpt from that exclusive conversation. Hello and welcome to WION's Global Leadership Series, where we interview current and former heads of state. Today with me is Kevin Rudd, former Prime Minister of Australia and the Global President of the Asia Society. Mr. Rudd, welcome to WION.
Good to be on the program. Good to be back in Delhi.
Do you think the Chinese are going to invade immediately? Most assessments are that it'll take a few years, but the way things are building up.
No, I don't accept the logic that China plans let's call it an armed assault on Taiwan, whatever form that takes, until the late 20s and early 30s. And there's a reason for it. Militarily, the PLA still feel underprepared. Financially and economically, because China depends on the dollar-denominated SWIFT system, financial settlements worldwide, both for trade and investment and capital markets, that for those reasons, the imposition of Western sanctions would be devastating for the Chinese economy. So China will wish to strengthen itself, both militarily, financially, and economically in terms of a greater degree of self-reliance before it rolls the dice on Taiwan. So I'm much more concerned about late 20s, early 30s. That would still fall within Xi Jinping's political career, given that he wants to be seen in Chinese communist history as the man who completed Mao's revolution.
Do you see Nancy Pelosi's visit as a needless provocation or a move that had to be made to show solidarity for Taiwanese democracy?
Well, solidarity between the United States and Taiwan existed well prior to the Pelosi visit. The problem with the Pelosi visit is that it fools around with the symbols of the one China policy. And if you wanted to create an unnecessary, artificial and early tripwire for crisis escalation, conflict and war, then there's nothing like fooling around with the one China policy through highly symbolic acts to bring you closer to the precipice. And that's one of the reasons why I opposed the visit. It's through no lack of affection for Taiwan. I studied there as a student. I know what it's like. I've got stacks of friends in Taiwan. I've seen it evolve over the years. But you've got to ask yourself two questions. Is Taiwan more secure or less secure as a result of the Pelosi visit? I would argue less secure, because the People's Republic of China have now normalized a new set of military drills and behaviors in and around the island, including trial blockades of maritime trade and air traffic, which in my mind have in fact brought Taiwan closer to the precipice than it was before.
It has been suggested here in India that if China were to invade Taiwan, it would serve as a message for Arunachal Pradesh. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, as you know, the history of China's claims in relation to what is now and should be sovereign Indian territory is a long and complex one. My overall judgment would be as follows. If Taiwan was successfully taken by China, knowing the nature of the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party would then feel emboldened across the other three frontiers that I referred to. And therefore, on the specific nature of what China would do in terms of all, as it were, the sub-elements of the very long disputed border with India, I couldn't comment. But I think it would be fair to say that if Taiwan was suddenly under China's belt, so to speak, that the nature of Xi Jinping is to continue to press advantage. He doubles down.
How does the Chinese leadership view India?
There was an excellent book written recently by a former Indian Foreign Secretary, Sharma, who I'm sure you know, on China's perceptions of India. He's a friend and colleague, and I've been reading the book. And it's an excellent account of long historical perceptions by China of India. I think the Chinese, in their heart of hearts and minds of minds, recognize India as an ancient and continuing civilization like their own. Of course, the entity we call India has been through multiple historical incarnations in that whole period. But so has China, frankly. You've had invasions by the Mongols, you've had invasions by the Manchurians, and as with India, you've had attempts at colonization by the West as well, including the British. And so ancient and continuing civilizations, problems of continuity in terms of let's call it external security threats, and problems from the West. I point to myself as some Australian criminal outpost of the British Empire. And so in terms of modern India, I think my conclusion as I deal with Chinese think tanks quite a bit still, despite COVID, is that the Chinese system's quite respectful of Prime Minister Modi's India. They've seen him re-elected with a thumping majority. They've seen a redirection of Indian strategic policy, most acutely manifested in the Quad and it being elevated now to summit level. They've seen an Indian economy now growing quite robustly, notwithstanding COVID, at between 6 and 7% annually. And China's slowing for a range of reasons, largely self-induced. So for those reasons, I think what permanently puzzles the Chinese is how can 1.3 to 4 billion people be a robust democracy, given their only historical script in their mind is that it has to be autocratic. So for all these reasons, I think there is perhaps a grudging respect, but a high degree of respect, I think, for India under Prime Minister Modi. And I think they were surprised at a military level by the degree of pushback on the border in 2020. I think they were militarily surprised.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Certainly. It's been good to be with you.
You can watch the full interview on WION at these times. Make sure you don't miss it. They say diplomacy is slow, nerve-wracking and sometimes boring, all of which is true. But it's way better than the alternative. Like Winston Churchill said, to jaw is better than to war. In West Asia, two old foes are trying to do that, Iran and the United States. First, some background. In 2015, Iran signed a nuclear deal with world powers. The terms were quite simple. Iran will halt its nuclear weapons program. In return, the West will lift all sanctions. As simple as that. Iran would be free to trade in the global market. But 3 years later, this deal collapsed, courtesy the United States. Then President Donald Trump was a vocal critic of the 2015 deal. He felt it was not tough enough. So what did Trump do? He unilaterally pulled America out of it. No discussions, no consultations. As always, the US did what it wanted. Trump went on to reimpose sanctions on Iran. He called it the maximum pressure campaign. Did it work? Well, quite the opposite. A defiant Iran accelerated their nuclear program. Today, they have enriched uranium to 60%. If they reach 90%, it is weapons-grade uranium. They could make a bomb in months. They're at 60%. Enter Joe Biden. Reviving the nuclear deal is on top of his foreign policy goals. Frankly, it's do or die for him. Biden failed to stop the Taliban in Afghanistan. Biden also failed to stop Russia and Ukraine. So with Iran, failure is not an option for him. Last year, he began indirect talks with Iran in Vienna. It was a really complicated setup. The US and Iran did not talk directly. They talked via the European Union. 16 months later, the deal is closer than ever. Right now, all sides are exchanging drafts. The European Union sent their version to both Iran and the US. Iran suggested a few changes. The US made some observations. Now the final decision lies with Iran. Their officials are studying America's response to their draft. A lot of back and forth. If they agree, if the Iranians agree, we could have a deal within days. Which brings us to the document itself. What are the key points? We can divide them into two parts. The first is sanctions relief. 17 Iranian banks and 150 financial institutions will be freed of sanctions. That would release billions of dollars in frozen assets. Iran would also be able to sell its oil. The second part is the nuclear program. Iran will reverse the enrichment process to acceptable levels. What are acceptable levels? Under the old deal, it was 3.7%. The idea is to reduce the breakout time, meaning the time required to make a nuclear warhead. The new draft puts the breakout time at 6 months. Now for the sticking points. If the talks dragged on for 16 months, clearly there are serious differences. And 3 of them are crucial to reaching an agreement. Difference number 1, the question of the Iran Revolutionary Guards. Now, this is a branch of the Iranian armed forces. The guards do most of Iran's dirty work in West Asia. Right now, the US has listed them as a terror group, which means there are sanctions, there are travel bans, even asset freezes. Iran wanted the US to delist the Revolutionary Guard, to remove them from the terror list, but the US refused to do that. Now, according to the latest reports, Iran has relented on this point, meaning they've dropped the demand to delist the Revolutionary Guards. It's a huge climb down. Difference number two. Pending investigation by the UN Atomic Agency. In June, the atomic watchdog passed a resolution against Iran. They found uranium traces at 3 undeclared sites. Obviously, they wanted to investigate it. Iran refused. Iran said only those investigations mandated by the 2015 deal will be allowed. The new ones must be dropped. So that's a big point of disagreement. And finally, difference number 3, political assurances. Most Republicans in the US are opposed to the nuclear deal. If a Republican becomes president again, the US could walk out of it. So Iran wants assurances, both political and financial assurances. The problem is Joe Biden cannot give any. You see, the Iran deal is not a convention or a treaty. It's only a political agreement, sort of like an understanding. So the US Congress cannot ratify it. The future of the deal depends on who occupies the White House. If it's a Republican, the deal is off. So these are 3 big differences. If both sides make some concessions, they can work around it. But even then, one obstacle remains, and that is Israel. Israel is trying to trick the book to prevent this deal. Every trick in the book, rather. Defense Minister Benny Gantz is flying to the US. He will meet with top Pentagon officials. His mission is quite simple, a last-minute appeal to bury the deal. Prime Minister Yair Lapid is also doing his bit. He says this deal will allow Iran to destabilize the region.
On the table right now is a bad deal. It would give Iran $100 billion a year. This money will not build schools or hospitals. This is $100 billion a year that will be used to undermine stability in the Middle East and spread terror around the globe.
It's not just words. You can see the tensions escalating in West Asia. In the last 2 months, Israeli jets repeatedly penetrated Iranian airspace. Each time, they were undetected. So Israel is preparing on all fronts a diplomatic and military offensive. Despite being so close to a deal, the rivalries have clearly not faded. On Wednesday, the US struck 9 ammunition depots used by Iranian proxies in Syria. At least 6 guards were killed. The strikes followed attacks on US forces in the country. It's a very interesting dynamic. The US says the strikes will not affect the nuclear deal talks. Iran says they have no links with the proxies. So the situation in West Asia is extremely tense. If the deal is struck, it could alter the regional power equations. For starters, think about the money. Iran will be able to sell 1 million barrels of oil every day. That's billions of dollars in oil revenue. Their industries, their foreign assets, all of it will be unfrozen once the deal is struck. It is a big deal. But the political impact could be much bigger. The first nuclear deal was also a normalization deal. The goal was to integrate Iran with the global economy. This time around, things have changed. Iran is ruled by a hardline anti-Western president. He is not interested in rebooting ties with the West. He wants to move Iran closer to the East. I'm talking about Russia, China, even India. Within the region, Iran's proxies could get more support. The draft does not talk about Iran's influence in Lebanon or Yemen or Syria. It does not limit Iran's support for its proxies. So in theory, Tehran can restart the West Asian Cold War with Saudi Arabia. A lot depends on the leadership. They can either use the deal to pursue prosperity or to reignite old rivalries. The ball is firmly in Iran's court. Now, some of you may not care too much about China or what's happening with the Iran nuclear deal, but work from home, now that should surely get a lot of you excited. And that's what we'll talk about now. Is work from home coming to an end? In the US, Apple has asked its workers to return to office. CEO Tim Cook has sent an email to all employees. He says they must be back in office for at least 3 days a week. That's 3 out of 5 working days. Apple's logic? Working from office will help employees reconnect with teams, also meet new colleagues in person. It's a fair point, and Apple is not alone in making it. Tesla too has asked its employees to return to work, except there is no hybrid setup there. Tesla workers must clock at least 40 hours in office every week, which makes it an 8-hour workday for 5 days a week. Simply put, it's the end of work from home. Goldman Sachs too has recalled its employees, so has Netflix. In India, tech company TCS or Tata Consultancy Services has asked people to return to work. November is when employees are expected to be back. TCS says 95% of its staff is partially vaccinated. 70% have received all doses, so it's safe for them to return to work. But here's a question. Was work from home only about social distancing? Of course, the pandemic brought this hard reset, but work from home also triggered a wider shift in the work culture. It made work more flexible, more inclusive, more diverse. A parent who could not commit to 9 hours in office could now log in from home and meet their targets. A specially abled person could now join the workforce from the comfort of their home. A nature lover could turn their holiday home into office and deliver assignments far from the madding crowd. Not too long ago, flexible working was being touted as the future of work. We all talked about it. Today, it seems to be becoming a thing of the past. So why is this happening? You see, while diversity and flexibility are ideal, what businesses really care about the most is productivity. And data shows that productivity has suffered because of work from home, at least in some sectors it has. Take, for example, Indian tech company Wipro. It decided to hold back variable pay of its employees. Do you know why? Wipro says the teams failed to achieve their targets. And come to think of it, it's not surprising. While work from home works well for individual contributors, teamwork definitely suffers. You could call me old school, but ask any team leader and they will tell you that video calls cannot replace face-to-face interactions and screen sharing cannot compensate for in-person presentations. Business leaders are well aware of this, so they're recalling employees to office. In India, 75 to 100% employees have returned to work in 35% of the organizations. Telecom and consulting sectors have seen the highest rate of return. How are employees coping with all of this? Many who complained about blurring lines between professional and personal lives are happy. Many who complained about overworking or working extra hours at home are also happy. But there are also many, many others who don't exactly like the idea of returning to work. And we understand why. Once a person has tasted the comfort of work from home, getting back to old ways can be difficult. Being stuck in traffic, spending money on work lunches, spending on work wardrobe, childcare, dropping and picking up children from a creche, none of it is easy. A survey conducted in April found that 64% of workers worldwide would consider quitting if asked to return to work full-time. 52% said they would rather take a pay cut, and that too as much as 11%. Returning to work has been like a game of chicken. Workers did not want to come back, employers wanted them to. Workers knew they had a fluid job market to leverage. But a lot has changed recently. Courtesy of the economy, there's a looming recession, and the job market is preparing for it. Some of the biggest companies in the world have announced hiring freezes. I'm talking about the likes of Microsoft and Google. Twitter, too, has announced a hiring freeze. It has also laid off 30% of its talent acquisition team. In July, Apple announced it is not looking to expand its headcount. In India, several startups have announced layoffs. By mid-July, some 34 Indian startups had asked employees to leave. This included unicorns like Meesho, Cars24, Ola, MPL, Unacademy and Vedantu. What we're staring at is a fast-closing job market. For employees, it means less options. For an employer, it means leverage. It means that they will be able to get workers back to their desks. For workers, it means less bargaining power. But is the power of balance so simple? A balance of power, more like. Can recession and the fall in the Wuhan virus cases actually eliminate work from home? I would say it won't be so easy. You see, if businesses want to hire the best of talent, they will have to meet the employees halfway. And employees even today prefer flexible working. In fact, flexible working remains among the top 3 motivators for finding a new job. Even today, 87% workers in the US say they will pick work from home if given a choice. By forcing return to work, businesses risk losing out on valuable talent. Like I said, they will have to meet workers halfway. In other words, businesses will have to come up with hybrid models. Allow some employees to work from home, some others to work from home and office alternatively, or co-locate, meaning allow employees to alternate between different offices across the country so that at least a portion of the team can be working from their home location on a given week. Several companies have already adopted this structure, the likes of Uber, Meta, EY, JP Morgan, Disney. It's a long list. So coming back to the question, is work from home coming to an end? Well, for some companies, yes, it is. For some sectors, yes. But broadly, not yet. Flexible working remains the future of work, whether companies like it or not, and its foundation is built on a fundamental acceptance that it is okay to have some team members work from home as long as their productivity is not suffering. I think this debate or this flux in the work market, job market, should force companies to relook at how they evaluate talent. Is it based on the number of hours spent in office? Or is it based on what they bring to the table? Tell us what you think about it. For the moment, we'll head to Pakistan. It's devastated. And I'm not talking about their economy tonight. I'm talking about their cities and towns hit by floods. Torrential rains have led to flooding. Villages have been submerged, farmlands destroyed. There are landslides and flash floods. Businesses have been suspended, normal life disrupted. In the last 2 months, more than 900 people have died due to the floods in Pakistan. This includes more than 300 children. At least 1,300 people have been injured. More than 10 lakh livestock have perished. 19 lakh acres of land destroyed. Over 95,000 homes. 3,000 kilometers of roads and at least 129 bridges, all destroyed by heavy rain and floods. And this crisis is not limited to one region or province. It's the same story all over Pakistan. Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Sindh, Balochistan, all of them have been battered by rain. It is being called the worst monsoon in more than 3 decades. Let me show you some images from Hyderabad, the second largest city in Sindh, Pakistan. Its low-lying areas have been inundated for weeks. The streets are submerged in 4 feet of water. The houses are floating. There's no way to flush it out. Then we come to Punjab. And these images are from a town called Fazilpur. Large swathes of land are underwater. Locals are commuting on boats and dinghies.
Our houses have been destroyed. We are living on a railway track near the station. There is about 10 to 12 feet of flood water.
Now look at these images. They are from Jafrabad in Balochistan. People are wading through flood waters, carrying their belongings to safer places. Makeshift camps have been set up along the roads. They're waiting for the next truck to leave.
We have been lying along the road. We don't have anything edible or any tents for shelter. It has been raining and we are with small children. Children got sick and we have nothing. I fear the children would die.
Pakistan receives monsoon rains every year, but this year has been especially bad. In July, it received 133% more rain than the average for the last 30 years. Balochistan alone recorded 379% more rain than the annual average. Sindh recorded 395% more rain than the annual average. Average rainfall in Pakistan this year was 267 millimeters. That's way higher than the 30-year average of 119. The government was caught off guard. As it is ill-equipped. The economic crisis has drained its coffers. Islamabad lacks the resources to deal with a tragedy like this. So what are they doing? They're asking people to donate money. How much money does Pakistan need for recovery efforts? $80 billion. 80 billion rupees, says the government. That's some $300 million. 80 billion Pakistani rupees. Islamabad does not have this money. So it has issued a public appeal. Earlier this week, Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif asked people to extend financial help to donate whatever little they can to the flood-hit people. They made the same appeal to international bodies seeking funds for relief and rehabilitation. The EU has agreed to provide $348,000 in humanitarian assistance. China has promised help too. It plans to send some 25,000 tents and $300,000 in emergency cash. Pakistan needs all the help it can get at the moment. And here in India, a new viral outbreak is being reported. Doctors are calling it the tomato flu, a rare disease which causes tomato-like blisters. More than 100 cases have been reported in 4 Indian states. Most of them are children below the age of 5. So what exactly is this virus? How does it spread? What are the symptoms? Should you be worried? Our next report has the answers.
A new disease is spreading in India. It goes by the name of tomato flu. The first case was reported in Kerala on May 6th. Since then, this disease has spread to Tamil Nadu, Haryana and Odisha. How many cases are these states reporting? There were a total of 100 as of Thursday, out of which 82 cases were in children below 5 years of age. So what exactly is this flu? And as a parent, should you be worried? To start with, the tomato flu is a rare viral disease. It results in tomato-like blisters, hence the name. There's no consensus on what the virus is. Scientists are still debating what causes it. Initially, they believed it to be an after-effect of dengue and chikungunya, but now they believe it could be caused by enteroviruses, like Coxsackie A17, a virus which shares many characteristics with polio. The debate is still going on. Next question, what are the symptoms of tomato flu? The foremost are tomato-like red blisters, along with the possibility of high fever, body ache, joint swelling, and vomiting. How can tomato flu be cured? There's no specific treatment yet, but tomato flu is a self-limiting disease. Its signs and symptoms resolve in a few days. To cope up with it, doctors recommend paracetamol, along with a hot water sponge to get rid of the blisters. What precautions must you take? It's the same as for any viral disease. Isolation for 5 to 7 days. Maintenance of proper hygiene. Sanitization of surrounding areas. And not sharing personal items or clothing. Next question. Why is this virus spreading now? Scientists blame the timing, the increased attention towards viral infections, an after effect of the Wuhan virus pandemic. They say the flu has existed for quite some time, but due to increased surveillance these days, the cases are making national headlines. Which brings us to the last question. Is this disease a cause of concern? In one word, no. The Lancet says tomato flu is not life-threatening, but that is only if it's in an endemic state, if it's restricted to certain areas. On a nationwide scale, there's not enough research to say how dangerous it could be.
The war in Ukraine has now completed 6 months. During this time, the United Nations has discussed it multiple times. Members have tried passing resolutions against Russia, and each time India did the same thing. It abstained from voting. India was neither with Russia nor with the West. But on Wednesday, that changed. For the first time, India voted against Russia at the UN Security Council. How did that happen? Has India broken its policy of neutrality? To answer these questions, we need context. Wednesday's meeting was supposed to take stock of the developments in Ukraine to see how the war is unfolding. So the Council wanted to invite Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. Just one problem. Zelensky is leading the war efforts in Ukraine. He could only address the Council via video link, but Russia opposed this. Listen to what their delegates said at the UNSC, and I'm quoting, Russia objects to the virtual participation of the Ukrainian President in today's meeting. He should participate in person, that is, be physically present in the Security Council chamber. There is no politics involved here. It is purely a procedural issue. As far as objections go, it's quite a weak one. Russia had no problem with inviting Zelensky. They just wanted him to attend the council in person. Now, this triggered a procedural vote. All 15 members could decide whether to let Zelensky attend virtually or not. 13 members, including India, voted against Russia. They wanted to let Zelensky attend. Russia naturally voted to block President Zelensky, while China abstained. Now, this was a procedural vote. It was not a resolution, which means the veto power does not even apply. So despite Russia's opposition, the vote was passed And Ukraine's President Zelensky did attend the council virtually. He also addressed its members. Now for the important question. Does this imply a change in India's official policy? Was this a vote against Russia? India's Foreign Ministry spokesperson was asked about this earlier today. This was his response.
We have not voted against anybody. It was a proposal to allow him to vote, to speak virtually, and we supported it. I think this was the third occasion that he spoke virtually. There have been 2 occasions in the past where he spoke virtually, and we supported that. So there's no question of us voting against Russia in any way.
Clearly, India is trying to downplay it, and frankly, it makes sense. Wednesday's vote was not about politics or positions. It was about procedure, basic decency, to be honest, which was not the case with the other resolutions. All the previous votes were explicitly against Russia. They were aimed at criticizing or condemning Russia, so India abstained. And remember, all those votes were triggered by the West, not this one. Wednesday's vote was triggered by Russia. It was explicitly against Ukraine, so abstaining or siding with Russia was not an option. Because doing that would mean condemning Ukraine. It would deny Zelensky a basic right to address the House. So to answer my first question, no, India's neutrality has not changed. In fact, this vote reaffirms India's position as a responsible and rational power. Let me quote what India's envoy said. India's approach will promote dialogue and diplomacy with an overarching aim to end the conflict and work with our partners to mitigate economic challenges. We continue to reiterate that the global order is anchored on international law, UN Charter, and respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity of states. Sums up the policy. Western countries have questioned India's abstentions at the UN. Their experts have called India unprincipled. Well, this should answer all of them. Picking sides was never the intention. If it were, India would not have voted against Russia on Wednesday. The objective is to resolve the crisis, not to make it worse. And to that end, India is sending more humanitarian aid to Ukraine, the 12th consignment since the war broke out. It includes 26 different types of medicines. It tells you what India's priorities are: ending the conflict without burning bridges. And we want to end tonight's show with a story from Papua New Guinea. The country has appointed a new minister, a minister for coffee. What do you think the job entails? Perhaps ensuring every citizen gets a perfect cup of coffee every morning. Well, we're joking. Papua New Guinea is looking to bring in more export revenue through coffee, and so it has roped in a minister for coffee. Which other countries have such unique ministries? Our next report tells you should not miss it.
Meet Joe Cooley. He has bagged what can easily be called the world's most coveted job. Joe Cooley has become the Minister of Coffee in Papua New Guinea. Cooley's job requires him to focus on coffee, coffee and coffee. Sounds like being paid to spend the day in a coffee house, right? Few things in the world are as relaxing as coffee. Like they say, it's like hopes and dreams in a cup. From the aroma of the fresh roast to the rush of the first sip, coffee is a mood-changing journey. For many, it is game-changing. For 2 million people of Papua New Guinea, coffee is livelihood. It is the country's second-largest agricultural commodity. Coffee accounts for 27% of Papua New Guinea's agricultural exports. Also 6% of the country's GDP. A quarter of Papua New Guinea's population works in the coffee industry. A lot of them work in small-scale coffee farms. Newly re-elected Prime Minister James Marape wants to revive the coffee industry. He wants the magic beans to bring in more export revenue. And so the Prime Minister has wasted no time in appointing a minister to oversee everything coffee. Joe Cooley is the lucky one. Now, why don't you try and answer a quick question? What coffee is to Papua New Guinea, toilet is to... If you are thinking Japan, you are right. Japanese toilets are hands down the world's fanciest. After all, they come with LED lighting and heated seats. Did you know Japan also has a museum dedicated to toilets? So if Papua New Guinea is appointing a minister of coffee, it is only fair Japan has a Minister of Toilet, right? In 2014, Japan's Minister of Women's Empowerment took on this unofficial title. Haruko Arimura became the world's first Minister of Toilet. Her role was to improve public toilets. Another such unexpected ministerial role was born during the pandemic. In 2021, Japan appointed a Minister of Loneliness. His job was to address the country's growing suicide rate. Japan wasn't the first. Guess who was? The United Kingdom. Back in 2018, the UK appointed a Minister of Loneliness. 2 years before that, the UAE was making global headlines. In 2016, it appointed a Minister of Happiness. Ohud Al-Rumi was sworn in to the post. She said her office was no laughing matter. In fact, she was given the target to bring the UAE to the list of the world's top 5 happy countries. Is there any such ministry you think your country should have too? Do write to us and let us know.
And now let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
French President Emmanuel Macron and IAEA Director General Raphael Grossi met in Paris to discuss the situation at Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant was captured by Russian troops in March. Japan's National Police Agency Chief Itaru Nakamura will resign over the assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. The announcement came as his agency released a report on how it failed to protect Abe. A long-awaited United Nations report on the treatment of Uyghur minorities by China in Xinjiang has been delayed further. The UN Human Rights Chief says it is unclear when the report will be published. Pakistan's anti-terror court approves pre-arrest bail for former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Police barred from arresting Khan till at least 1st September in the terrorism case filed against him. An oil spill was caused by a fire on a yacht off the coast of Baja California Sur in Mexico. The spill has affected the natural protected area of Balandra Beach. South Korea's central bank raised its key interest rate by a 0.25 percentage point in a bid to contain inflation and prevent capital outflows as the U.S. Federal Reserve gears up for more hikes. Colombian President Gustavo Petro announced that drug traffickers who comply with government surrender conditions and exit the trade will not be extradited to face charges abroad. Petro said his government is in touch with various armed groups who want to negotiate their way out of the country's conflict. Heavy rain and flash floods drenched Mississippi, prompting rescue operations, closures, and evacuations. Rain has pummeled the central and southern parts of the state for at least 3 days. Premier League clubs have broken their record for spending in a summer transfer window. According to Deloitte, the 20 clubs have spent over $1.7 billion, exceeding the previous record of $1.66 billion in 2017. The overall expense could increase with still a week to go until the transfer window slams shut on September 1st. 22-time Grand Slam champion Rafael Nadal and women's world number 1 Iga Świątek were two of the biggest names in attendance as the exhibition event held by the USTA Tennis Place for Peace raised $1.2 million for humanitarian relief efforts in Ukraine.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas Images. Thanks very much for watching.